There was a time not so long ago in Earth's history when the planet was home to giants, massive creatures that moved across frozen landscapes, adapted to cold climates, and shaped the environments they lived in. From vast herds crossing open plains to solitary figures moving through snow-covered forests, these animals existed in a world defined by ice, wind, and survival. Yet, despite their size, strength, and adaptation, these giants did not last. As one begins to reflect on their disappearance, it becomes evident that their extinction was not the result of a single moment, but a process, one shaped by changes in climate, shifts in environment, and the gradual transformation of the world around them. The end of the Ice Age brought warming temperatures, melting ice, and new ecosystems, altering the conditions that these animals had evolved to survive in. At the same time, another presence began to expand across the planet: humans, moving into new regions, interacting with these environments, and becoming part of the same systems that these giants depended on. As we consider these overlapping changes, it becomes clear that the disappearance of the Ice Age giants was not simple, but the result of multiple forces acting together, each contributing to a shift that these creatures could not overcome. As we begin this exploration, we will look closely at what really happened, examining the environment, the changes, and the interactions that led to the end of some of the largest animals to ever walk the earth. And before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Hidden History of Earth, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Every story, every memory, and every place matters, and together we keep history alive. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. A World Built for Giants. As one begins to consider the world in which the Ice Age giants lived, it becomes evident that this environment was not simply cold, but structured in a way that supported large, specialized animals capable of surviving under conditions that would challenge most modern species. The Ice Age, often associated with vast sheets of ice and freezing temperatures, was in reality a complex system of climates and landscapes, where cold conditions were balanced by open plains, seasonal variation, and the presence of vegetation adapted to these environments. As we reflect on this balance, it becomes clear that much of the land during this period was not covered in ice, but instead consisted of expansive grasslands, often referred to as steppe-like environments, where grasses and low-growing plants formed the foundation of ecosystems. These regions, shaped by cold and dry conditions, provided the resources necessary for large herbivores to thrive, offering both food and space for movement across vast distances. As one considers the structure of these landscapes, it becomes evident that they were defined by openness, with few large trees in many areas, allowing visibility across long distances and influencing how animals interact with their surroundings. The climate, though cold, was not static, but characterized by seasonal changes that influenced the availability of resources and the behavior of organisms. As we reflect on these seasonal patterns, it becomes clear that animals would need to adapt to variations in temperature, food availability, and environmental conditions, creating a system where movement and timing played important roles in survival. The presence of ice sheets in certain regions would influence global climate patterns, affecting temperature and precipitation across the planet, while also shaping the geography of the land. As one considers the influence of these ice sheets, it becomes apparent that they played a role in directing wind patterns and water flow, contributing to the formation of different habitats within the Ice Age environment. The interaction between cold air masses and the landscape would create conditions where certain areas experience harsher climates, while others remain more moderate, allowing a range of environments to exist within the same period. As we reflect on this diversity, it becomes evident that the Ice Age was not a uniform world, but one composed of multiple interconnected systems, each supporting different forms of life. The vegetation that grew within these environments would be adapted to withstand cold temperatures and limited moisture, with grasses and shrubs dominating in many regions, while mosses and other low-growing plants occupy areas closer to ice or with harsher conditions. That as one considers the role of this vegetation, it becomes clear that it formed the base of the food system, supporting large herbivores that depend on consistent access to plant material. The presence of these herbivores would, in turn, influence the distribution and growth of vegetation, creating a feedback system where animals and plants interact continuously. As we reflect on this interaction, it becomes evident that the Ice Age environment was shaped not only by climate, but also by the activity of its inhabitants, creating a system where biological and physical processes are closely linked. The soil and ground conditions would also play a role in shaping the environment, with frozen layers in some areas influencing water retention and plant growth, while other regions remain more flexible and supportive of vegetation. As one considers these ground conditions, it becomes apparent that they contribute to the overall structure of the ecosystem, influencing how water and nutrients are distributed. The presence of rivers and water sources, often fed by melting ice or seasonal changes, would provide essential resources for both plants and animals, creating areas of increased activity and interaction. As we continue to reflect on the Ice Age environment, it becomes clear that it was a world built on balance, where cold conditions, open landscapes, and adapted life forms combined to create a system that could support large and complex organisms. The understanding of this environment provides insight into how life can thrive under conditions that differ significantly from those of the present, illustrating the adaptability of both ecosystems and the organisms within them. As we continue to explore the Ice Age environment, it becomes evident that the success of the giants that lived during this period was deeply connected to the stability and predictability of the ecosystems that surrounded them, creating a system where large animals could rely on consistent patterns of climate and resource availability to sustain their existence. The open grasslands, which extended across vast regions, provided not only a continuous source of food, but also the space necessary for large herds to move and interact, reducing competition by allowing animals to spread out across the landscape. As one considers the importance of space in this environment, it becomes clear that it played a crucial role in supporting large populations of herbivores, enabling them to access resources without exhausting a single area. The movement of these animals would contribute to the distribution of nutrients across the land, as their activity influences soil composition and plant growth, creating a system where life supports the environment that sustains it. As we reflect on this movement, it becomes evident that it represents a key component of the ecosystem, linking different regions and contributing to the overall balance of the system. The presence of predators within this environment would also play a role in shaping the behavior and distribution of herbivores, creating a dynamic where movement and vigilance are necessary for survival. As one considers the interaction between predators and prey, it becomes apparent that it contributes to the regulation of populations, preventing overuse of resources and maintaining the stability of the ecosystem. The climate, while generally cold, would also include periods of relative warmth, particularly during seasonal transitions, allowing for the growth of vegetation and the replenishment of resources. As we reflect on these warmer periods, it becomes clear that they are essential for sustaining life, providing opportunities for growth and recovery within the ecosystem. The cycles of freezing and thawing would influence the availability of water and nutrients, creating patterns that organisms must adapt to in order to survive. As one considers these cycles, it becomes evident that they contribute to the rhythm of the Ice Age environment, shaping the behavior of both plants and animals. The presence of snow and ice would also influence movement, creating barriers and pathways that affect how organisms navigate the landscape. As we reflect on these physical features, it becomes clear that they are not simply obstacles, but integral components of the environment that shape the interactions within it. The ability of Ice Age animals to move across these landscapes, often over long distances, highlights their adaptation to these conditions, enabling them to function within a system that would be challenging for less specialized organisms. The stability of this environment, however, was not permanent, but subject to gradual changes that would alter the conditions over time. As one considers the potential for change, it becomes evident that even a system that appears stable can shift, influenced by factors such as climate variation and external pressures. The understanding of this potential for change is important in considering the eventual disappearance of the Ice Age giants, as it suggests that their survival was dependent on conditions that could be altered. As we continue to reflect on the Ice Age environment, it becomes clear that it was a world where balance and adaptation allowed large animals to thrive, but also one where that balance could be disrupted, leading to consequences that extend beyond individual species. As one begins to consider the animals that define the Ice Age, it becomes evident that these giants were not simply large in size, but highly specialized organisms, shaped by their environment in ways that allowed them to survive under conditions that would challenge most forms of life. These creatures, often referred to as megafauna, included massive herbivores that moved across open landscapes and powerful predators that operated within the same system, each playing a role in maintaining the balance of the ecosystem. As we reflect on their physical characteristics, it becomes clear that their size was not an isolated trait, but part of a broader set of adaptations that included thick insulating fur, layers of fat, and body structures designed to conserve heat in cold climates. The presence of these features indicates that these animals were not only capable of surviving in cold environments, but were fully integrated into the conditions of the Ice Age. As one considers the significance of this integration, it becomes evident that their survival depended on a close relationship with their environment, where physical traits and behavior were aligned with the demands of the landscape. The herbivores, which formed the foundation of this system, would rely on the availability of vegetation, moving across vast areas to access the resources necessary to sustain their large bodies. As we reflect on this movement, it becomes clear that it was not random, but guided by patterns of resource availability and environmental conditions, allowing these animals to maintain access to food throughout the year. The presence of large herds would create a dynamic environment, where the movement of animals influences the distribution of resources and the structure of the landscape. As one considers the impact of these herds, it becomes evident that they played a role in shaping the environment, contributing to the maintenance of open grasslands through their feeding and movement. The predators that existed alongside these herbivores would also be adapted to the conditions of the Ice Age, possessing physical and behavioral traits that allowed them to locate, pursue, and interact with prey in an environment that is both open and challenging. As we reflect on the role of these predators, it becomes clear that they contribute to the balance of the ecosystem, influencing the behavior and distribution of herbivores and preventing the overuse of resources. The interaction between predators and prey creates a system where survival is influenced by both physical capability and environmental awareness, requiring organisms to respond to a range of factors in order to persist. As one considers the sensory capabilities of these animals, it becomes evident that they are adapted to detect changes in the environment, allowing them to respond to movement, sound, and other signals that indicate the presence of other organisms. The ability to interpret these signals would play a crucial role in survival, enabling animals to avoid threats or locate resources as needed. As we reflect on this aspect, it becomes clear that the Ice Age giants were not simply large and powerful, but also capable of interacting with their environment in complex ways, using both physical and sensory adaptations to navigate their world. The scale of these animals would also influence how they experience the environment, as their size allows them to move across large distances and access resources that smaller organisms cannot. As one considers this scale, it becomes evident that it provides both advantages and challenges, requiring a balance between energy intake and expenditure to sustain such large bodies. The presence of these giants within the ecosystem would create a landscape that is shaped by their activity, where the movement and behavior of animals influence the structure of the environment. As we continue to reflect on these creatures, it becomes clear that they represent a key component of the Ice Age world, embodying the adaptations and interactions that define this period. As we continue to examine the Ice Age giants, it becomes evident that their survival was not solely dependent on their physical adaptations, but also on their ability to function within a complex network of interactions that defined the ecosystem, creating a system where each species played a role in maintaining balance and stability. The herbivores, by consuming vegetation and moving across the landscape, would influence the distribution of plant life, creating patterns of growth and regeneration that support the overall structure of the ecosystem. As one considers this influence, it becomes clear that these animals were not passive inhabitants, but active participants in shaping their environment, contributing to the conditions that allowed them to thrive. The predators, in turn, would influence the behavior and distribution of herbivores, creating a dynamic where movement and vigilance are necessary for survival. As we reflect on this interaction, it becomes evident that the relationship between predators and prey is a central component of the ecosystem, contributing to the regulation of populations and the maintenance of balance. The presence of multiple species within the same environment would create a network of interactions, where the behavior of one species can influence others in ways that are both direct and indirect. As one considers these interactions, it becomes apparent that the Ice Age ecosystem was highly interconnected, with changes in one part of the system affecting others. The availability of sources, such as food and water, would also influence these interactions, creating conditions where organisms must compete or adapt to varying levels of availability. As we reflect on this variability, it becomes clear that survival within the Ice Age environment required flexibility and the ability to respond to changing conditions. The large size of these animals, while providing certain advantages, would also require a consistent supply of resources, making them particularly sensitive to changes in the environment. As one considers this dependency, it becomes evident that even small changes in climate or resource availability could have significant effects on their survival. The ability of these animals to migrate or adjust their behavior in response to such changes would play a crucial role in their persistence. As we reflect on the importance of movement, it becomes clear that it allows these animals to access new areas and adapt to shifting conditions, contributing to their ability to survive in a changing environment. The social behavior of some species, including the formation of herds or groups, would also influence survival, providing advantages such as increased awareness and protection from predators. As one considers these social structures, it becomes apparent that they contribute to the overall resiliency of the species, allowing them to respond collectively to challenges. The combination of physical adaptations, behavioral strategies, and environmental interactions creates a system where survival is determined by multiple factors working together. As we continue to reflect on these giants, it becomes clear that they were not only products of their environment, but also contributors to its structure and function, forming a system where life and environment are closely linked. The understanding of these relationships provides insight into how such large and complex organisms could exist within the Ice Age world, and how their survival was dependent on the balance of the ecosystem in which they lived. As one continues to reflect on the Ice Age world, it becomes evident that the presence of these giants was not accidental, but the result of a system that, for a long period of time, maintained balance between climate, environment, and life, allowing large and specialized animals to exist and thrive. This balance was not static or unchanging, but dynamic, shaped by interactions between temperature, vegetation, and the movement of organisms across vast landscapes. As we consider this balance, it becomes clear that the Ice Age environment provided a set of conditions that supported large herbivores by ensuring a steady, though seasonally variable, supply of vegetation, while also supporting predators that relied on these herbivores for survival. The openness of the landscape allowed for visibility and movement, creating conditions where animals could respond to changes in their environment with relative efficiency. As one reflects on this openness, it becomes evident that it played a crucial role in shaping the interactions between species, influencing how they move, feed, and respond to potential threats. The climate, though cold, was consistent enough over long periods to allow ecosystems to stabilize, giving species the opportunity to adapt to conditions that, while challenging, remained predictable. As we reflect on this predictability, it becomes clear that it is a key factor in the development of large and complex organisms, as stability allows for the evolution of specialized traits that depend on consistent environmental conditions. The cycles of seasons, with periods of growth and decline in vegetation, would create a rhythm that influences the behavior of organisms, guiding migration patterns and feeding strategies. As one considers this rhythm, it becomes evident that it contributes to the overall structure of the ecosystem, creating patterns that organisms can rely on in order to survive. The interaction between herbivores and vegetation would also play a role in maintaining this balance, as the feeding activity of large animals prevents the overgrowth of certain plant species, allowing for a diversity of vegetation to exist. As we reflect on this interaction, it becomes clear that it represents a feedback system, where the actions of organisms influence the environment in ways that support the continued existence of those organisms. The presence of predators adds another layer to this balance, regulating herbivore populations and influencing their behavior, preventing overuse of resources and contributing to the stability of the ecosystem. As one considers the role of predators, it becomes evident that they are not simply sources of danger, but integral components of the system, ensuring that no single group dominates the environment. The movement of animals across the landscape would also contribute to this balance, as migration allows for the redistribution of resources and reduces pressure on any single area. As we reflect on this movement, it becomes clear that it represents a mechanism by which the ecosystem maintains its stability, allowing for the recovery and regeneration of vegetation. The interconnected nature of these processes highlights the complexity of the Ice Age environment, where multiple factors work together to create a system that supports large and diverse forms of life. As one considers the duration of this balance, it becomes evident that it persisted for thousands of years, allowing species to adapt and evolve within a relatively stable framework. The presence of this balance, however, does not imply permanence, as even stable systems are subject to change over time. As we continue to reflect on this environment, it becomes clear that the Ice Age world was characterized by a delicate equilibrium, where the interactions between climate, vegetation, and animal life created conditions that were highly supportive of large organisms, but also dependent on the continuation of those conditions. As we move deeper into understanding this balance, it becomes evident that the stability of the Ice Age ecosystem was closely tied to the consistency of environmental conditions, and that even small shifts within this system could begin to alter the relationships that sustained it. The large herbivores, while well adapted to cold and open environments, depended on the continued presence of specific types of vegetation, which in turn depended on the climate remaining within a certain range. As one considers this dependency, it becomes clear that the survival of these giants was linked to a chain of conditions that extended beyond their immediate control, connecting them to broader environmental processes. The predators, similarly, relied on the presence of herbivores, creating a system where the success of one group is directly tied to the stability of another. As we reflect on this interdependence, it becomes evident that the Ice Age ecosystem was a network of relationships, where changes in one part of the system could have cascading effects on others. The climate, while stable over long periods, was not immune to variation, and gradual shifts in temperature or precipitation could begin to influence the availability of resources. As one considers the impact of such changes, it becomes apparent that they would first affect the environment, altering the growth of vegetation and the distribution of habitats. As we reflect on these initial changes, it becomes clear that they would set in motion a series of responses within the ecosystem, as organisms adjust their behavior in an attempt to adapt to new conditions. The ability of these animals to respond to change would depend on their flexibility and the extent to which their adaptations allow for variation. As one considers the limitations of these adaptations, it becomes evident that highly specialized organisms may be particularly vulnerable to changes in the environment, as their traits are suited to specific conditions that may no longer exist. The movement of animals, while providing some ability to adapt, would not always be sufficient to compensate for large-scale changes in climate or habitat. As we reflect on this limitation, it becomes clear that the balance of the Ice Age ecosystem, while effective under stable conditions, may not be resilient to significant shifts. The presence of humans, emerging during the later stages of the Ice Age, would introduce an additional factor into this system, interacting with the environment and the organisms within it in ways that are different from other species. As one considers the role of humans, it becomes evident that their ability to adapt, move, and utilize resources could influence the existing balance, adding complexity to an already interconnected system. The combination of environmental change and new interactions would begin to alter the conditions under which the Ice Age giants had previously thrived. As we continue to reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the balance that supported these giants was not permanent, but dependent on a set of conditions that could shift over time, leading to changes that would ultimately affect the survival of these animals. The understanding of this balance, and its eventual disruption, provides insight into how ecosystems function and how they can change, illustrating the delicate nature of the relationships that sustain life. Chapter 2. The End of the Giants. As one begins to examine the transition from the stable conditions of the Ice Age to the period that followed, it becomes evident that the environment did not change suddenly, but gradually, through shifts that unfolded over extended periods of time, altering the conditions that had once supported the existence of large and specialized animals. The end of the Ice Age is often associated with warming temperatures, but this warming was not uniform or immediate, instead occurring through a series of fluctuations that influenced different regions in different ways. As we reflect on these fluctuations, it becomes clear that they introduced variability into a system that had previously relied on relative stability, creating conditions where the predictability of the environment began to diminish. The gradual increase in temperature would lead to the melting of ice sheets, altering the distribution of water across the planet and contributing to changes in sea levels and landforms. As one considers the impact of melting ice, it becomes evident that it would reshape coastlines, flood low-lying areas, and influence the availability of habitats for both plants and animals. The release of water from melting ice would also affect river systems, increasing flow and altering patterns of erosion and sediment deposition, further contributing to changes in the landscape. As we reflect on these changes, it becomes clear that the environment was undergoing a transformation that extended beyond temperature, affecting multiple aspects of the ecosystem simultaneously. The warming climate would also influence the types of vegetation that could grow in different regions, leading to a gradual shift from open grasslands to environments that include more trees and shrubs. As one considers this shift in vegetation, it becomes evident that it would have significant implications for herbivores that depend on grasses as their primary food source. The reduction of open grasslands would limit the availability of resources for these animals, forcing them to adapt to new conditions or move to areas where suitable vegetation still exists. As we reflect on this challenge, it becomes clear that the ability to adapt to changing environments is a critical factor in survival, and that even gradual changes can create significant pressure on species that are highly specialized. The alteration of habitats would also influence the distribution of animals, as species move in response to changing conditions, leading to shifts in population patterns and interactions. As one considers these movements, it becomes evident that they would create new dynamics within the ecosystem, as species encounter different environments and interact with other organisms in new ways. The predators that rely on herbivores would also be affected by these changes, as shifts in prey distribution influence their own movement and behavior. As we reflect on the interconnected nature of these relationships, it becomes clear that changes in one part of the ecosystem can have cascading effects on others, creating a system where multiple factors contribute to the overall outcome. The climate, vegetation, and animal populations are all linked, and changes in one component can influence the others in ways that are not always immediately apparent. As one considers the broader implications of these changes, it becomes evident that the end of the Ice Age represents a period of transition, where the conditions that once supported large animals begin to shift, creating challenges that require adaptation and resilience. The gradual nature of these changes highlights the importance of time in shaping the environment, as processes that occur over long periods can lead to significant transformations. As we continue to reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the world of the Ice Age giants was beginning to change in ways that would alter the balance of the ecosystem, setting the stage for the events that would follow. As we continue to explore the changes that marked the end of the Ice Age, it becomes evident that the transformation of the environment was not limited to physical changes in climate and landscape, but also extended into the structure and function of ecosystems, altering the relationships between organisms and the conditions under which they lived. The shift in vegetation, from open grasslands to more varied environments that include forests and mixed plant communities, would introduce new patterns of resource distribution, affecting how animals access food and move across the landscape. As one considers this shift, it becomes clear that it would create a more fragmented environment, where suitable habitats are separated by areas that may not support the same types of life. This fragmentation would make it more difficult for large herbivores to move freely across the land, limiting their ability to access resources and increasing competition for available food. As we reflect on this limitation, it becomes evident that the movement patterns that once supported the survival of these animals would be disrupted, creating new challenges that require adaptation. The presence of forests and denser vegetation would also influence visibility and interaction within the ecosystem, creating conditions where movement is more restricted and where predators and prey must adjust their behavior. As one considers these changes, it becomes apparent that they would alter the dynamics of the ecosystem, influencing how species interact and respond to one another. The climate, continuing to warm, would also introduce changes in seasonal patterns, affecting the timing of plant growth and the availability of resources throughout the year. As we reflect on these changes, it becomes clear that they would influence the behavior of animals, requiring adjustments in migration, feeding, and reproduction. The ability to adapt to these changes would vary among species, with some capable of adjusting their behavior or physiology, while others remain more closely tied to the conditions of the Ice Age. As one considers the variability in adaptation, it becomes evident that species with more specialized traits may be at greater risk, as their survival depends on conditions that are no longer present. The presence of humans, expanding into new regions during this period, would introduce additional pressures on the ecosystem, as their activities influence both the environment and the organisms within it. As we reflect on the role of humans, it becomes clear that they represent a new factor within the system, interacting with the environment in ways that differ from other species, including the use of tools and the ability to alter habitats. The combination of environmental change and human activity creates a complex scenario where multiple factors contribute to the transformation of the ecosystem. As one considers the interaction between these factors, it becomes evident that the end of the Ice Age is not defined by a single cause, but by a combination of processes that together influence the survival of species. The gradual nature of these changes highlights the importance of understanding how ecosystems respond to variation, illustrating how shifts in climate, vegetation, and species interactions can lead to significant outcomes over time. As we continue to reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the world of the Ice Age giants was entering a phase of transition, where the conditions that once supported their existence were changing in ways that would ultimately affect their survival. As one begins to consider the role of humans in the disappearance of the Ice Age giants, it becomes evident that their presence introduced a new type of influence into ecosystems that had, for thousands of years, been shaped primarily by climate and natural interactions between species. Humans, unlike other animals within these environments, possess the ability to adapt quickly, to move across different landscapes, and to use tools that allowed them to interact with their surroundings in ways that extended beyond physical limitations. As we reflect on this adaptability, it becomes clear that humans were not simply another species entering the ecosystem, but a factor that could alter patterns of interaction, resource use, and environmental structure. The movement of human populations into new regions would bring them into contact with Ice Age animals that had not previously encountered such a presence, creating a situation where existing behavioral patterns may not be sufficient to respond to this new type of interaction. As one considers this lack of familiarity, it becomes evident that the response of these animals to human presence would differ from their responses to other predators, potentially affecting their ability to avoid or adapt to new threats. The use of tools and coordinated behavior would allow humans to access resources in ways that are not available to other species, influencing the distribution and availability of those resources within the environment. As we reflect on this capability, it becomes clear that human activity could affect not only individual organisms, but also the broader structure of the ecosystem, altering patterns of resource use and interaction. The presence of humans would also influence the behavior of other species, as animals respond to the new conditions created by human activity, adjusting their movement, feeding, and interaction patterns. As one considers these behavioral changes, it becomes evident that they contribute to a shift in the dynamics of the ecosystem, where established relationships between species are altered by the introduction of a new factor. The ability of humans to communicate, plan, and work together would further enhance their impact, allowing them to coordinate actions and adapt to changing conditions in ways that are not typical of other species. As we reflect on this coordination, it becomes clear that it represents a significant difference in how humans interact with their environment, enabling them to influence ecosystems on a broader scale. The presence of humans would also introduce new patterns of resource use, as they gather, hunt, and utilize materials from the environment in ways that differ from other animals. As one considers these patterns, it becomes evident that they would influence the availability of resources for other species, potentially creating competition or altering the balance of the ecosystem. The interaction between humans and Ice Age animals would therefore represent a new dimension within the environment, where the established dynamics are influenced by a species that operates under different principles. As we continue to reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the arrival of humans introduced a factor that interacts with existing environmental changes, contributing to the overall transformation of the ecosystem in ways that are both direct and indirect. As we continue to examine the influence of humans on the Ice Age environment, it becomes evident that their impact cannot be understood in isolation, but must be considered as part of a broader set of changes that were already affecting the ecosystem, creating a situation where multiple factors interact to shape the outcome. The presence of humans within these environments would coincide with ongoing shifts in climate and habitat, creating conditions where animals are already adapting to changing circumstances. As one considers this overlap, it becomes clear that the addition of human activity introduces an additional layer of complexity, influencing how species respond to environmental challenges. The ability of humans to move across different regions would allow them to interact with multiple ecosystems, spreading their influence over a wide area and contributing to changes that extend beyond localized environments. As we reflect in this movement, it becomes evident that it would create connections between different regions, allowing for the transfer of resources, knowledge, and impact across the landscape. The interaction between humans and Ice Age animals would also be shaped by the behavior of both groups, with humans adapting their strategies based on the environment and the availability of resources, while animals respond to the presence of humans in ways that reflect their own adaptations. As one considers these interactions, it becomes apparent that they contribute to a dynamic system where both sides influence one another, creating patterns of behavior that evolve over time. The presence of humans would also influence the physical environment, as their activities can alter landscapes, affect vegetation, and change the distribution of resources. As we reflect on these changes, it becomes clear that they contribute to the transformation of the ecosystem, creating conditions that differ from those that existed before. The combination of human activity and environmental change would create a scenario where species must adapt to multiple pressures simultaneously, increasing the difficulty of survival for those that are highly specialized or less adaptable. As one considers the cumulative effect of these pressures, it becomes evident that they can lead to significant changes in population dynamics, influencing which species persist and which decline. The role of humans within this system, therefore, is not simply as a direct influence, but as part of a network of factors that together shape the outcome. As we continue to reflect on this period, it becomes clear that the arrival of humans represents a turning point in the Ice Age environment, where the balance that had previously supported large animals begins to shift under the influence of multiple interacting forces. One begins to bring together the environmental changes and the arrival of humans within the Ice Age world. It becomes evident that the disappearance of the giants was not the result of a single cause, but the outcome of multiple pressures acting together over time, gradually weakening a system that had once been stable and supportive of large and specialized life forms. The warming climate, which altered the structure of the environment, would reduce the availability of open grasslands and replace them with more varied landscapes, creating conditions that were less suitable for large herbivores that depended on consistent and abundant plant resources. As we reflect on this shift, it becomes clear that these animals, adapted to specific environmental conditions, would face increasing difficulty in finding the resources necessary to sustain their large bodies. The fragmentation of habitats, caused by changes in vegetation and landscape, would limit movement and reduce the ability of these animals to migrate effectively, increasing competition for resources within smaller areas. As one considers the impact of this fragmentation, it becomes evident that it would create localized pressures on populations, where food scarcity and environmental constraints combine to reduce survival rates. The presence of humans within this changing environment would introduce additional challenges, as their activities influence both the availability of resources and the behavior of animals. As we reflect on this interaction, it becomes clear that the combination of environmental stress and human influence creates a scenario where animals must adapt to multiple changes simultaneously, increasing the difficulty of survival. The predators within the ecosystem would also be affected by these changes, as shifts in prey availability influence their own ability to find food, creating a cascading effect that impacts multiple levels of the ecosystem. As one considers this cascading effect, it becomes apparent that the decline of one group of organisms can lead to further changes in the system, amplifying the overall impact of environmental transformation. The gradual nature of these changes means that the decline of the giants would not occur all at once, but through a series of reductions in population, where fewer individuals survive over time until the species can no longer sustain itself. As we reflect on this gradual decline, it becomes clear that extinction is often a process rather than a single event, shaped by the accumulation of pressures that reduce the ability of a species to persist. The role of reproduction and population dynamics would also play a significant part in this process, as reduced access to resources and increased stress can affect the ability of animals to reproduce successfully, leading to further declines in population. As one considers these dynamics, it becomes evident that the survival of a species depends not only on the ability of individuals to live, but also on the ability of populations to maintain themselves over time. The interaction between environmental change, human activity, and biological factors creates a complex system where multiple influences contribute to the outcome. As we continue to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that the disappearance of the Ice Age giants was not the result of a single overwhelming force, but the combined effect of gradual changes that together altered the conditions under which these animals could survive. As we move toward a final understanding of the extinction of the Ice Age giants, it becomes evident that this process represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between life and environment, where the conditions that once supported large and specialized organisms were replaced by a system that favored different forms of life. The gradual transformation of the environment would create new ecosystems, characterized by different types of vegetation, climate patterns, and interactions between species, leading to the emergence of communities that differ significantly from those of the Ice Age. As we reflect on this transformation, it becomes clear that the disappearance of the giants is part of a broader process of ecological change, where some species decline while others adapt and persist. The inability of the giants to adapt to these new conditions highlights the importance of flexibility in survival, illustrating how species that are highly specialized may be more vulnerable to change. As one considers this vulnerability, it becomes evident that the traits that once allowed these animals to thrive, such as their large size and specific dietary needs, may become disadvantages under new conditions, limiting their ability to adjust to changes in the environment. The presence of humans within these changing ecosystems would further influence the outcome, as their activities continue to shape the environment and the distribution of resources. As we reflect on the role of humans, it becomes clear that they are part of the broader system of change, interacting with environmental processes in ways that contribute to the transformation of ecosystems. The final disappearance of the giants, therefore, can be understood as the result of a convergence of factors, where climate change, habitat alteration, and human activity combine to create conditions that are no longer suitable for their survival. As one considers the broader implications of this process, it becomes evident that extinction is not an isolated event, but part of the ongoing evolution of life on Earth, where changes in the environment lead to shifts in the composition of ecosystems. The understanding of this process provides insight into how species respond to change, illustrating the importance of adaptation and resilience in determining survival. As we continue to reflect on the end of the Ice Age giants, it becomes clear that their disappearance marks the end of one chapter in Earth's history and the beginning of another, where new forms of life emerge to occupy the spaces left behind. As we reflect on the disappearance of the Ice Age giants, it becomes clear that their story is not defined by a single moment, but by a gradual shift, a world changing around them piece by piece until the conditions they once thrived in no longer existed. It was not just the cold that faded, but an entire system of life that had been built upon it. These giants were not weak or unfit for survival. In fact, they were perfectly adapted to their environment. But when that environment began to change, when climates warmed, landscapes transformed, and new forces entered the ecosystem, the balance that once supported them slowly began to break. What makes this story so compelling is that it is not just about the past. It is a reminder of how deeply connected life is to the environment, and how even the most powerful creatures can be affected by gradual change. It shows us that survival is not just about strength, but about the ability to adapt when the world itself begins to shift. As we step away from the frozen landscapes of the Ice Age, we are left with a deeper understanding of how Earth evolves, and how every era, no matter how stable it may seem, carries within it the potential for transformation. If you found this journey into the lost world of the Ice Age giants interesting and want to explore more hidden histories, ancient mysteries, and untold stories of our planet, make sure to subscribe and stay connected for more.